Hey,
Hey,
you and your fellow
thank you,
senators were summoned. You were summoned back to Washington this week, but your colleagues in the House didn't join you. They ended up scrapping their plans to return to D.C. after a congressional top doctor, I guess, warned it was risky. What is going on down there? What the hell is happening, man?
Well, first of all, it's great to be on. It's great that you all are strong of spirit and body, and I'm grateful to know that. And happy Mother's Day to all the women who are mothers of biology and spirit, who take care of our kids, our communities, and our country. But this has been a frustrating week. I have no problem being here. When I was in New Jersey working around the clock with my team on the crisis. But now that we're here, I was hoping that we could actually do things that would deal with this crisis. But the judiciary hearing I went to, for example, had nothing to do about the crisis, the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who've gotten sick or the thousands who are dying. It had to do with a judicial vacancy that's not even open till September. What we need to be doing here in the Senate, if we're going to be here, and I'm happy to be here, but we should be working on our frontline workers who still don't have the protective garment they need. We need to be working on why is it that still many small businesses and small nonprofits and faith-based institutions haven't been able to avail themselves of the resources they need to survive. Or let's start talking about how we're going to set up a national system of testing and contact tracing. So this has been a very frustrating week where we haven't been dealing with the crisis, and instead it seems, as I said during the hearing yesterday, that we're picking topics that are the most divisive when we could be unifying as a Senate. There are common cause that we have that could bring us together to serve and help to stop this crisis from happening in our states.
Senator, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Yet Mitch McConnell's priority this week seemed to be confirming judicial nominees and political appointees. Now, you sat in on one of those judicial hearings for a protege of McConnell's, Justin Walker, a 37-year-old guy, I understand. How can you stop him from prioritizing his own agenda over people's lives? How can you do that?
You know, speaking up. I didn't even ask questions to a guy who was originally deemed unqualified by the American Bar Association, one of the small handful of judges in our history that's on their way to the bench, having been deemed unqualified. I didn't even ask him questions. I called and appealed, not to even a sense of shame, but a sense of patriotism. Every single day, we are losing Americans. In New Jersey, more than World War I, the Vietnam War, Korea combined. And it is outrageous to me when you see the challenges facing everyone from the Navajo Nation, that after New York and New Jersey have the most cases, where we see first responders who are separated from their family members and they're losing their lives. I have a bipartisan bill, in fact, with Grassley to try to make sure our first responders can get the benefits for their families should they fall in the line of duty. There are so many things we could be working on, but yesterday we had a hearing on a judge that I believe is unqualified for the bench, as opposed to doing the things that I know people on both sides of the aisle all across America believe that we've got to start doing. America is at the top of the planet in the way that this is affecting, taking lives, infecting people, destroying businesses. We have got to get to the work of the people and not the ridiculous partisan antics we just saw.
Senator, talking about the work of the people, I mean, even though COVID cases are spiking around the country, President Trump has encouraged states to reopen. Many states have reopened, and his administration has reportedly shelved the very detailed CDC guidance that was given to the administration. How do we do this safely? How do we open up the states? Because there isn't much guidance given to the states. We're seeing armed protesters charging states, buildings. People want to go back to work. What do you need to hear to feel comfortable with states reopening?
Well, we need to listen to medical professionals, listen to scientists. We have a CDC for a reason. And to ignore the common sense things that they're saying, that even I know I've talked to people in the private sector who are abiding by so many of those rules and concerned that if we open too early, like we did back in 1918, the second wave was worse than the first, which cost your economy and even more. We've got to do this right. And what really frustrates me is that I hear people using militaristic terms. This is a war. I've heard people say that. Well, if that's the case, what we should be doing is not having this kind of perverse Hunger Games where you have literally governors competing against each other for the critical resources they need. We didn't do that in World War II. We had a national mobilization to meet the threat to our nation. This is a president who's trying to say this is still like the Articles of Confederation, all the states are on their own. No, we're the United States of America, and this president should be stepping up, using the Defense Production Act and more to make sure that we are producing the materials we need to get out of this. Everybody knows we need testing, contact tracing, to make sure that we are apportioning it correctly, making sure that we are actually having supply chains that serve the purpose of this country, which should be, yes, to get back to business, but first and foremost, to protect human life. This is a failure of leadership. And it's a shame because I've seen 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, I don't care, Republican or Democrat, Chris Christie rose to the challenge. Even Giuliani, who's at dead approval ratings in New York, during that challenge, at least he could rise up and call to the patriotism of this nation. Our president now is demeaning, degrading, divisive, insulting people, calling out governors, tweeting out the most impulsively ridiculous things about liberating states when everybody in this country wants to keep human lives safe. He seems to want to try to trigger partisan animosity to better help his reelection. We need leadership on the national level, and I'm frustrated how this president is not rising to this occasion. One of the few world leaders whose approval rating is actually going down.
Senator Booker, I'm really glad you brought up the devastation on the Navajo Nation. I don't think it's something that's getting enough media attention, and I appreciate you bringing it up and keeping the focus. Shifting gears a little bit, we're all obviously incredibly concerned about protecting our first responders on the first line, but there's an interesting story that includes your own chief of staff, Matt, who has been working double duty as an EMS volunteer, and incredible bravery on his part. What has he shared with you as someone who's literally straddling both worlds between politics and a frontline worker about this COVID crisis?
Well, one thing you all just highlighted, that it's not just a first responder, it's their entire family making a sacrifice. So his wife, Vicki, it was really a family commitment because Matt has to stay isolated now. I'm blessed to have a staff of people who don't only view their service as their jobs, but above and beyond. And when our governor saw so many of our first responders getting sick and our ambulance services getting threadbare, he called retired people up, and my chief of staff rose to that challenge. And his experience, frankly, as a firefighter, EMT, has really informed a lot of the work that my office has been doing, both understanding what kind of resources our frontline workers need, that the urgency to get things like hazard pay, because the sacrifices that a lot of our frontline workers and essential workers are making are real and substantive, as well as the risk to themselves and their families. And then just again, as I said, we've lost 27 of our first responders, EMT, firefighters, police officers. The first one was an amazing young man in his 30s with children, Israel Tolentino, and just making sure that we were positioning ourselves to be the frontline fighters in the Senate to make sure that we get benefits for families of first responders that do drop to this, tragically drop to this disease.